looks awful. Bah, ha, 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 ha. You look like you've been in a tornado. If I had hair like that, I wouldn't even leave the house. Bah, ha, 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 ha. Hey, what's going on? Are you teasing my friend? You know that's not nice. That's bullying. Yeah, but look at his hair. Well, nobody's perfect. Would you want someone to tease you about your hair? No, I guess my feelings would be hurt. We need to treat everyone with respect. Treat them how we want to be treated. Yeah, I guess you're right. I should think about other people's feelings. Yes, it's much more fun to make friends than to tease them.
Hi, guys. You know, Julia, you are right. We all need to be kind to each other. You know who else had a problem with bullying?
Who?
Stuart Little.
Oh, Stuart! I can't wait to hear about Stuart Little today.
Yes, we're going to read chapters 4 and 5 today, students, and you're going to hear about how Stuart handled his bully. And as I read, I want you to think about if he did the right thing, if he made the right choices, or if you would do something differently from Stuart. Chapter 4, Exercise. One fine morning in the month of May, when Stuart was 3 years old, he arose early as was his custom, washed and dressed himself, took his hat and cane, and went downstairs into the living room to see what was going on. Nobody was around but Snowbell, the white cat belonging to Mrs. Little. Snowbell was another early riser, and this morning he was lying on the rug in the middle of the room, thinking about the days when he was just a kitten. "Good morning," said Stuart. "Hello," replied Snowbell sharply. "You're up early, aren't you?" Stuart looked at his watch. "Yes," he said, "it's only 5 minutes past 6, but I felt good and I thought I'd come down to get a little exercise." "I think you'd get all the exercise you want up there in the bathroom, banging around, waking everybody up, trying to get that water started so you can brush your teeth. Your teeth aren't really big enough to brush anyway. Want to see a good set? Look at mine." Snowbell opened his mouth and showed 2 rows of gleaming white teeth, sharp as needles. And in the picture, he's looking down at Stuart like he wants to eat him.
Oh, poor Stuart.
Poor Stuart. What would you have said if you were Stuart to Snowbell at that point?
I would have told him that everyone's teeth are important, even if they're tiny.
That's right. That's right. So he's kind of being very, very unkind. He's being a bully, isn't he? "Very nice," said Stuart, "but mine are all right, too, even though they're small. As for exercise, I take all I can get. I bet my stomach muscles are firmer than yours." "I bet they're not," said the cat. "I bet they are," said Stuart. "They're like iron bands." "I bet they're not," said the cat. So what do you think about this conversation, Julia?
I think that Snowbell is being mean to Stuart for no reason at all. Just being mean.
He's just being mean, that's right. Stuart glanced around the room to see what he could do to prove to Snowbell what good stomach muscles he had. He spied the drawn window shade on the east window with its shade cord and ring like a trapeze, and it gave him an idea. Climbing to the windowsill, he took off his hat and laid down his cane. "You can't do this," he said to the cat, and he ran and jumped onto the ring, the way acrobats do in the circus, meaning to pull himself up. So he wanted to go up on the window shade. What do you think? Was that a good choice?
Oh, it sounds like fun, but probably not a good choice.
A surprising thing happened. Stuart had taken such a hard jump that it started the shade. You know, if you pull on the shade, it goes up. With a loud snap, the shade flew up clear to the top of the window, dragging Stuart along with it and rolling him up inside so that he couldn't even budge. "Holy mackerel," said Snowbell, who was almost as surprised as Stuart. "I guess that'll teach him to show off his muscles." "Help, let me out," cried Stuart, who was frightened and bruised inside the rolled-up shade, and he couldn't hardly breathe. But his voice was so weak that nobody heard. Snowbell just chuckled. He was not fond of Stuart, and it didn't bother him at all that Stuart was all wrapped up in a window shade, crying, hurt, and unable to get out. Instead of running upstairs and telling Mr. and Mrs. Little about the accident, Snowbell did a very curious thing. He glanced around to see if anybody was looking, Then he leapt softly to the windowsill, picked up Stuart's hat and cane in his mouth, and carried them to the pantry and laid them down at the entrance to the mouse hole.
Oh no, not the mouse hole!
What do you think's going to happen next, Julia?
I don't know, but that's not very nice. What is she trying to do?
Yeah, what do you think Snowbell's thinking?
I don't know, but it doesn't seem very nice to
No,
put Stuart's things over there by it. Is the family going to think he went down there?
Oh, that's a possibility, because they were afraid that he might go down the mouse hole. When Mrs. Little came down later and found them there, she gave a shrill scream, which brought everybody on the run. "It's happened!" she cried. "What has?" asked her husband. "Stuart's down the mouse hole."
No!
So your prediction was correct. Very good. Chapter 5, Rescued. George, remember that's Stuart's brother, was in favor of ripping up the pantry floor. He ran and got his hammer, his screwdriver, and an ice pick. "I'll have this old floor up in a double quick time," he said, inserting his screwdriver under the edge of the first board and giving a good vigorous pry. "We will not rip up this floor till we've had a good search," announced Mr. Little. "That's final, George. You put that hammer away." "Oh, all right," said George. "I see that nobody in this house cares anything about Stuart but me." Mrs. Little began to cry. "My poor, dear little son," she said. "I know he'll get wedged somewhere." So what do you think? You think he's going to get rescued? Is something...
I hope they find out he's in the blind.
I do too, because remember, he can't breathe very
And they're
well.
about to tear the house up.
They're about to... Just because you can't travel comfortably in a mouse hole doesn't mean it isn't a perfectly suitable place for Stuart, said Mr. Little. "Just don't get yourself all worked up." "Maybe we ought to lower some food down to him," suggested George. "That's what the state police did when a man got stuck in a cave." He ran to the kitchen and came back with a dish of applesauce. "We can pour some of this in, and it will run down to where he is." You think that's a good plan? Pouring applesauce down the mouse hole?
Ugh, no.
Do you like applesauce, Julia?
Oh, I do indeed. I make an excellent applesauce and potato chip recipe myself.
You'll have to bring some of that next week.
Oh, indeed.
George spooned out a bit of the applesauce and started to poke it in the hole. "Stop that!" bellowed Mr. Little. "George, will you kindly please let me handle this situation? Put that applesauce away." Mr. Little glared fiercely at George.
Fiercely.
Ooh. "I was just trying to help my brother," said George, shaking his head as he carried the sauce back to the kitchen. "Let's all call to Stuart," suggested Mrs. Little. "It's quite possible that the mouse hole branches and twists about and he just got lost." What do you think? Is that a good plan?
It would be if he was actually down there.
It would be. Right. "Very well," said Mr. Little. "I will count 3. Then we will all call, and then we will all keep perfectly quiet for 3 seconds and listen for his answer." He took out his watch. They got down on their hands and knees and called, "Stuart!" And then they all kept perfectly still for 3 seconds. Stuart, from his cramped position inside the rolled-up shade, heard them yelling and called back, "Here I am!" But he had such a weak voice and was so far inside the shade that the other members of the family could not hear him. "Again," said Mr. Little. 1, 2, 3. "Stuart! Stuart!" It was no use. No answer. Mrs. Little went up to her bedroom, lay down, and cried. Mr. Little went to the telephone and called up the Bureau of Missing Persons. But when the man asked for a description of Stuart and was told he was only 2 inches high, the man hung up. He didn't believe him. So what do you think about that?
Oh, I'm sure they thought it was a prank call.
Yeah, that's what happened. George, meantime, went down cellar and hunted around to see if he could find the other entrance to the mouse hole. He moved trunks, suitcases, flower pots, baskets, boxes, and broken chairs from one end of the cellar to the other. But he found no hole. He did, however, come across an old discarded rowing machine and became interested in it. You know how he's always getting distracted.
Oh, yes.
What he's doing. When lunchtime came, everybody had forgotten about breakfast. All 3 sat down to a lamb stew which Mrs. Little had prepared, but it was a sad meal. Each one trying not to stare at the small empty chair which Stuart always sat in next to Mrs. Little's glass of water. No one could eat. So great was the sorrow. George ate a bit of dessert, but nothing else. When lunch was over, Mrs. Little broke out crying again and said she thought Stuart must be dead. Nonsense, nonsense, growled Mr. Little. If he is dead, said George, we ought to pull down the shades all through the house.
Oh, good idea.
Yeah, what do you think's going to happen next?
I hope they find Stuart.
And he raced to the windows and began pulling down the shades. George, shouted Mr. Little in an exasperated tone, if you don't stop acting this way, I'll have to punish you. But George had already run into the living room and begun to darken it to show his respect for the dead. He pulled a cord and out dropped Stuart onto the windowsill. Well, for the love of Pete, said George, look who's here, Mom. Now, how do you think George feels when he finds Stuart?
Oh, proud, excited.
How do you think Stuart feels?
Oh, very glad.
It's about time somebody pulled down that shade, said Stuart. That's all I can say. He was quite weak and hungry. Mrs. Little was so overjoyed to see him that she kept right on crying. Of course, everybody wanted to know how it happened.
Oh.
Uh-oh. Do you think he's going to tell about Snowbell?
I hope he tells.
It was simply an accident that might happen to anybody, said Stuart.
Accident.
As for my hat and cane being found at the entrance to the mouse hole, you can draw your own conclusions. So he didn't tell about Snowbell. Why do you think he didn't tell?
I guess he didn't want to get Snowbell in trouble.
Oh, you think that's so? Would you say that Stuart was kinder than?
He was a
Snowbell?
much better friend.
Yeah, he was a much better friend. Students, remember, if you have a problem with bullying, don't go it alone. Tell somebody. Tell your teachers, your parents, a preacher, an aunt that you trust, someone that can help you. And Julia, what's our lesson for today?
That it's much more fun to make friends than to tease them. Right? I'm sorry. How about we go play fetch?
Okay. I like the game.
Oh, yay!
Happy Easter, everybody.
Happy
See you next
Easter.
week.